Greetings, everybody. Welcome to a new year, not the actual new year, but a new Wotv year of units. That's right. Basically, as of November 1st, I kind of consider this to be the real start of a brand new year of Wotv characters. And because, the collaboration is essentially announced as a New Year's thing. So I don't know. If I didn't say that before, I'm claiming it now. As for this year going forward, I do want to say that I'm going to be making just some minor changes to the way we're doing these videos, which is I would like the first video talking and showing off a character to be a little more succinct, a little bit more concise, specifically to do with how I think the unit is to be built. I do want to touch on some key points with that unit and potentially some key highlight skills, but for the most part, going forward, the second part video should be essentially the longer one, and this one I'm going to try and keep generally down. We'll see how it goes. But that is my idea going forward. So with that being said, let's talk about Yuna. Now here is Yuna combined with a light elemental party. I think that honestly, some big takeaways from Yuna is that stats-wise, she isn't incredibly overly impressive. I'm not entirely sure, besides the excuse usually of gunner range character where, stats aren't quite as important. But you take a look at someone like Gilgamesh here versus someone like Yuna, and you can kind of get an idea that overall her stats, while not being bad in a lot of areas, she doesn't seem anywhere near as bulky. She doesn't anywhere seem as much attack. And there are a few maybe other points of contention that seem that she is considerably weaker than a lot of other characters we've seen recently. That being said, I do think that overall she will be quite successful in the long run, especially with another brand new gunner coming in the near future. How long that is good for kind of depends on a bunch of stuff. But let's talk about some highlights. First off, weapon. I think that her main weapon is quite interesting and a really big contender for just her best-in-class weapon. I think that critical here is very high. We also have a nice amount of attack stat. But then you look at this, whenever an attack is hit, you automatically just remove some resistance that your opponent has, and that is just good in a bunch of situations. It also has human physical killer, AP cost down, and elemental resistance of 5. Now I'm not saying it's as good as a reliquary, but if you have to split the difference and you can't quite have the reliquary gun on another character at the same time as potentially on Yuna, well, maybe this handgun is actually just good enough to get the job done. As for Trust Mastery skill, I don't know. This one I don't think will actually end up being on a lot of Yuna final builds. It is a nice Trust Mastery. It has critical, it has accuracy, it has attack, and it has HP. And the skill itself gives 30 accuracy for 4 turns for self and grants CT up of 100 whenever a critical hit occurs. It's incredibly synergistic with the direction that Yuna seems to be going, which is critical hits and higher accuracy to potentially deal with evasion characters. However, the one problem that I think here is that Yuna might be a little AP hungry, might be wanting some extra sources of AP or potentially even haste. And if that's the case, this Trust Mastery probably won't be the one. I potentially see that Yuna's build will most likely focusing on trying to get as much human killer and DPS damage from her follow-up attacks as you can possibly get. Similar to what Bart's is like, but also I think it's important to note that this Trust Mastery probably isn't going to be what a lot of people will choose. I think a lot of the old standards will return for this one, but I think that it's not just because of that, it's because the ability on this Trust Mastery only targets herself, the user in question, not anyone else. If it was an accuracy boost to multiple characters, I think it would be a slightly different story. But accuracy does become incredibly needed in the future. I could see this potentially being subbed in a lot of cases. All right, jumping over to support skills. Support skills are pretty set in stone here. Starting off with this one, the standard one that you want on gunners, 24% attack, 40 defense penetration, single target resistance penetration of 40, undispellable, and move -1. It wouldn't be any kind of a consideration, but I think that this is always the thing you want. This was proven to be successful back in the day with Alaya, and I think nothing has changed here. This is just absolutely solid. The sniper range is not good enough. The critical hit rate and defense penetration of Trick Lancer is a potentially secondary good one, as well as missile attack and luck increase from sniper as well is pretty considerable. Nullify, confusion, and stun and accuracy would only be really wanted if accuracy was really required. Yuna already has a ton of accuracy, so unless you're going overkill, probably don't need that. But her other ability, I feel, is also just a general lock because it is a speed support skill. Magical distance and physical distance-based resistance essentially on this one, and range +1. If you take a look at what a ranged user is essentially wanting, I think these two main support skills check pretty much all the boxes, and except for very rare occasions, rare metas will be always very, very standard and incredibly easy for a Yuna build to essentially be this. I'm pretty happy with it. Next is our counters. And counters, we have three choices here. We have the Trick Lancer one, which is fairly limited range but counters physical damage. We have the Sniper one, counter physical damage with a decrease in accuracy. And then Yuna's new one, stands to counter all damage with a 30% HP heal. Yuna doesn't have too terribly much HP, so I'm curious as to whether this skill will be even very good. If she just essentially gets hit and dies, that's not really good, and you're probably not going to use it all that much. Honestly, it's one of the weakest set of counters I feel like I've seen in a while, unless the HP one is just something that I'm not particularly seeing that much. It probably is pretty substandard. Now, as for building in terms of job choices, I think here we do have the option of Trick Lancer, which does give critical rate up. That buff alone might be kind of important, seeing that Yuna does get benefits from critical hits. And it does have access to some piercing damage abilities, but it is a different damage type, so I think pretty much unless you're running it for crit, this is just not an option. People won't be using this. Sniper, on the other hand, has very high potentials, and I could see Sniper being the major choice for people wanting to build Yuna in a reliable fashion. It does have the range increase for 3 turns, which isn't super important, but that does come with defense penetration up. You can also decrease agility, inflict disable, increase attack and nether beast killer, which can be useful for certain guild raids, for example. 25% chance to inflict paralysis, and break physical barrier, which actually is one of the most important things. What is really important about the acknowledgement of the Sniper set is that Sniper is perfect for Yuna as a gunner. There is no casting time on any of the abilities for Sniper. It has the arch, so it gets over the problem of things directly in your range. And last but not least, it has range increases for a lot of its abilities that do synergize with the fact that Yuna can increase her range by quite a bit. So I like Sniper. And then we get to talking about this. The 2 sub-job abilities. First off, one that selects 2 targets. This one right here. Decreases AP by 15 and causes confusion. It's a status effect ability. Yuna is a physical unit. She will very unlikely be running High Faith, which means that her confusion is almost certainly not going to happen. As for the other ability, it is defense shred by a factor of 60. Problem being here, it's only for this cast, which makes it pretty weak in comparison to what a lot of other units can have. Now, if you think about this just extended range, I think that it makes a ton of sense why they didn't do this too much. But I do think it's a little bit disappointing that defense shred is just so limited on this. Now, what this basically means is that I think the most best sub job for bang for your buck is the Sniper, and it's not even close between the 3 options. Of course, people are willing to debate in the comment section. I love to hear some opposing opinions, but my general impression is as such. Now, talking about her main kit, normally we go into extensive detail talking about every single ability, but you can't see that on Wotv Calc, and I am going to demo these abilities later, so I'm not too terribly interested in actually showing it off here. What I am interested in talking about it is in terms of synergy. For the most part, Yuna's support skills are quite nice, starting with an AoE ability that does a lot. 200% chance for physical and magical increases, dispelling haste for allies upon any of their attacks hitting, upon hit, decrease healing power, gives auto revive to herself, and when a target is revived, automatically cast a skill of re-raising with hate down, while also increasing elemental resistance of 20% for 4 turns. It's an amazing support skill that pushes Yuna into a really nice direction of having a lot of support on a very single skill, that it works both physical and magical teams, which is great, and then protects herself with auto revive, but also supports auto revive characters. Now, if you're basically getting at this, Yuna is a kind of just gunner version of Bart's for her follow-up attacks, but I think is actually a really nice all-around character for new players and old players alike, because you can combine her across multiple elements. That elemental resistance alone is pretty juicy. But then in just increasing damage and doing a bunch of other stuff and dispelling haste, which is such an important status of benefit to the opponent, is just solid across the entire board. Talking about her other skill, which is quite important, is this one, and this is her key one. First of all, it increases range by 2 for 1 billion turns until she gets hit twice. It restores 10 AP when she performs a critical hit for 4 turns. And when the ally that she chooses fires any attack, Yuna will shoot a follow-up attack. This is Yuna's big thing that she does in her kit, which is the similar to Bart's style follow-up attack, except Bart's needed to be in close proximity, where this one, I believe the range is still quite generous on this, if not just not a factor on it. And we will test that in a minute, or in the next video. But overall, this is a big consideration. You want characters that are essentially faster than Yuna. While Yuna does have a range down one, you really want to separate the space as much as possible, let Yuna hang back, and let a strong front unit go in first. A follow-up or a front runner style heavy, quite capable of taking DPS unit would be really great. This opens the door to a lot of different units, such as Garuza, who's good against anti-magic, or other characters like Gilgamesh, who are good against anti-physical. But Yuna has a large range of basically combinations of units that she can go essentially across and work, provided that the BCs are there to support her. And gun BCs do have a pretty good tradition of it. Now, all of this is just generally nice. Yuna herself should be still pretty good at dealing DPS, considering that most of her abilities that she has accessible to her are increased, or do benefit, from range increases, which does include her job level 25 one that selects 2 targets and decreases single target resistance by a factor of 60 for 3 turns for an enemy, dealing 200% damage, 30% increased hit chance, 1 billion% chance of critical and piercing damage, and it is multiple hits. Why I think this is important for Yuna's team designation is that she essentially wants to be put with single target attackers. If you remember a little while ago when I talked about which teammates would kind of want that, well, Dark Veritas is a brand new unit that is a really good single target attacker, but would essentially like someone to go first and maybe do some single target AoE shred, followed by him going in and dealing DPS. Also, I believe he wanted barrier break as well as a few other stuff, So there is already formulating some interesting combinations here, and we haven't even gotten to Ice Jaden, which will be coming in a couple of weeks. Either way, I think Yuna is really, really solid. If you take a look at Altima and Wotv Calc right now, both of them have put her quite high. Altima has actually had a quite low rating of Yuna early on. Whether or not that's fair, we'll check in the next video, but I think that she has a wide combination of characters, basically a next generation 100 cost parts, and I can see her having a good longevity just from her openness of partnership, but being very easy for people to just pick up and play because her build seems rather straightforward, and she seems to get, at least for now, without looking at the event equipment, enough to really make her successful. Thanks so much for watching, take care, and we'll test her out in the next video.